I've never been one for conspiracy theories. The world is chaotic enough without inventing shadow governments or alien overlords. My name is Marcus Chun, and until last Tuesday, I was content with my unremarkable life as a telecommunications specialist at Meridian Communications. The irony isn't lost on me that someone who spent their career ensuring clear transmission of information would be among the last to understand what was actually happening. Tuesday began like any other day, alarm at 6:15. I scanned headlines on my tablet. International tensions were flaring again. Something about naval exercises in the South China Sea and unusual troop movements along the Eastern European border. Standard saber rattling that had become background noise in our 24-hour news cycle. I remember dismissing it with a cynical swipe of my finger. There's always a crisis somewhere. My apartment felt particularly quiet that morning. Usually, I could hear my neighbor's shower running through our shared wall, but there was only silence. I should have recognized it as the first warning sign, that unnatural stillness that precedes disaster. Instead, I attributed it to Mr. Grayson finally fixing his ancient plumbing. The drive to work was unusually smooth. Traffic thinned out near the city center, which I credited to some unremembered holiday or local event. The radio played the same 5 songs it always did, interrupted by commercials promising security and comfort through consumer products. If only it were that simple. We've got the quarterly security assessment today, my supervisor, Diane, reminded me as I settled at my desk. Meridian handled communications infrastructure for several government contracts. Nothing classified, but enough that we had regular procedural reviews. The Pentagon liaison will be here at 11. I nodded, barely registering the information as I logged into my terminal. My morning disappeared into the routine of bandwidth allocations and transmission protocols. At 10:43, my phone vibrated with a text from an old college friend who now worked at the Department of Defense. "Hey Marcus, you still at Meridian? Stay home tomorrow." I frowned at the cryptic message. Rachel and I hadn't spoken in months. "Why? What's up?" I texted back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, just a recommendation. The Pentagon liaison never showed up for our 11 o'clock meeting. Diane made increasingly frustrated calls that went unanswered while the rest of us waited in the conference room, making small talk about weekend plans that would never happen. At 11:37, every screen in the building simultaneously went black. Then the emergency broadcast system tone blared through our phones, computers, and the office televisions, that familiar, grating alert that usually preceded tornado warnings or amber alerts. The screens flickered to life with white text on a black background. Emergency alert system. This is not a test. Stand by for important information from the Department of Defense. We all stared, momentarily frozen. In 7 years at Meridian, I'd never seen the emergency system activate like this. The message remained for almost a minute before the screens returned to normal. No follow-up, no explanation. "Probably a system test they forgot to label as such," I said, breaking the uneasy silence. "Happens more often than you'd think." My colleagues nodded, eager to accept this rational explanation. We returned to our desks, but the atmosphere had shifted. People spoke in hushed tones, glancing occasionally at their phones as if expecting another interruption. At 1:15, Diane called us back to the conference room. "I've just been informed that the security assessment is postponed indefinitely," she announced, her typically confident voice tinged with uncertainty. "They've asked us to continue normal operations and await further instructions." "Does this have anything to do with the alert?" someone asked. "I'm told it was an accidental triggering during a scheduled system upgrade," Diane replied too quickly. I'd spent enough time around communications systems to recognize prepared talking points. The afternoon dragged on, productivity waning as people refreshed news sites that reported nothing unusual. I tried texting Rachel again, but my message remained undelivered. By 4:30, a third of the office had quietly disappeared, citing family emergencies or sudden illness. I stayed until 5, adhering to my routine like a life preserver in increasingly turbulent waters. The drive home felt wrong. Too many people heading in one direction, too few in another. The grocery store parking lot was packed, while the usually busy shopping mall stood eerily empty. As I waited at a red light, a military convoy passed through the intersection, 6 olive-drab trucks moving with purposeful efficiency. Not unusual on its own. We had 3 bases within 50 miles. But the soldiers' expressions as they passed sent a chill through me. tight-jawed focus masking something that looked disturbingly like fear. At home, I flipped through television channels seeking information. Every news station featured experts discussing the same international tensions from this morning, now with heightened concern about unprecedented communications between adversarial military forces. None mentioned the emergency alert. I tried calling Rachel again. Still nothing. My apartment windows faced east, providing a clear view of the night sky above the city skyline. At 9:17, I noticed unusual aircraft activity, helicopters moving in formation, and what looked like military transport planes. Their navigation lights blinked against the darkening sky like coded messages I couldn't decipher. My phone chimed. Finally, a response from Rachel. "Marcus, I can't talk. Whatever happens, stay away from population centers tomorrow. They're calling it a preparedness exercise, but it's more. Don't trust the broadcasts. This isn't a drill." I typed several responses, deleting each one before sending. What was I supposed to make of this? Rachel had always been level-headed, not prone to exaggeration or paranoia. But this sounded like the setup to a bad thriller movie. "Rachel, you're freaking me out. What exactly is happening?" Three dots appeared, disappeared. Then, bandwidth allocation issues yesterday weren't technical. Something interfering. Pentagon's calling it anomalous transmission patterns. I've said too much. Be safe. Before I could respond, a final message came through. "Just heard we're going to communications blackout. Remember when we talked about Oppenheimer last year? About things that once known can't be unknown? I think we crossed that threshold. God help us all." That was the last I heard from her. I stayed up until 2 a.m., flipping between news channels and social media, finding nothing concrete, just an undercurrent of unease I couldn't pin down. Eventually, exhaustion won out over anxiety. As I drifted off to sleep, I rationalized everything away. Rachel was overworked and paranoid. The emergency alert was a technical glitch. The military movements were routine exercises. Tomorrow would be normal. I set my alarm for 6:15 as always, maintaining the comforting illusion that adherence to routine could somehow prevent whatever was coming. The last thing I remember before falling asleep was the distant sound of more helicopters passing overhead and my neighbor's door slamming shut, followed by hurried footsteps down the hall. In my final moments of consciousness, I made a decision that seems incomprehensible in retrospect. I decided to go to work tomorrow anyway. After all, what could possibly happen that would make the mundane tasks of bandwidth management and signal transmission irrelevant? The world was still turning. The stars still followed their ancient paths above my window. The governments and militaries still played their eternal games of strategy and counter-strategy. And I, in my pathetic human need for normalcy, chose to ignore the warning signs. I chose to believe that tomorrow would be just another Wednesday. I didn't yet understand that Tuesdays, ordinary, unremarkable Tuesdays, were about to become extinct, along with everything else I had ever known. The alarm never went off. I woke to the harsh electronic scream of every device in my apartment activating simultaneously. My phone, tablet, laptop, even the smart TV in the living room, all blaring that grating emergency alert tone at maximum volume. The clock read 5:47 a.m. Before I could reach for my phone, all screens switched to the same stark white text on black background. Emergency alert system. This is not a test. Nationwide emergency. Stand by for instructions. The noise cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence. I fumbled for my phone, heart hammering against my ribs. Unlike yesterday's brief interruption, this message remained on screen. After 30 seconds of stillness, the text began to scroll. Technical malfunction in emergency broadcast system. Disregard this alert. Normal broadcasting will resume shortly. Remain calm and continue regular activities. The message disappeared, and my phone returned to its normal state. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to slow my breathing. Just a glitch. A system error. Nothing to worry about. But Rachel's warning echoed in my mind. Don't trust the broadcasts. I tried calling her, straight to voicemail. Same with my parents in Seattle and my sister in Chicago. The calls connected, but no one answered. I switched to social media, where #emergency-alert was already trending. People across the country reporting the same experience, sharing screenshots, speculating wildly. Government testing new alert system. Has to be hacked. Too many devices at once. Military exercise. My brother-in-law is Army, and said they were planning something big. Anyone else's internet running really slow after this? Outside my window, the early morning darkness was broken by unusual activity. Vehicles moving on streets that should have been empty at this hour. Distant sirens. A helicopter passed overhead, searchlight sweeping across building facades. I showered and dressed quickly, switching on the television for news. Every channel showed regular programming, morning shows discussing celebrity gossip and cooking tips as if nothing had happened. Only a small scrolling banner at the bottom acknowledged, "Nationwide ES malfunction under investigation." Officials confirmed no actual emergency. My neighbor's apartment remained silent. I knocked, no answer. The peephole in his door was dark. The drive to work revealed a city divided. Some areas seemed normal, people waiting at bus stops, grabbing coffee, heading to jobs. Other streets were eerily empty or clogged with outbound traffic. I passed a gas station with a line of cars stretching around the block, people filling not just their tanks but multiple containers loaded into trunks and truck beds. Halfway to the office, all traffic lights simultaneously turned green in every direction. I watched in horror as two cars collided in the intersection ahead of me, followed by the screech of brakes and crunch of metal as vehicles attempted to navigate the sudden chaos. I swerved onto a side street, hands shaking on the wheel. My phone rang. Diane. "Marcus? Where are you?" Her voice was tight, controlled panic lurking underneath. "About 10 minutes out. There was an accident. Don't come in. We're evacuating the building." "What? Why?" "Military personnel arrived about 20 minutes ago. They're setting up some kind of equipment in our server room. Then we got orders to clear out, no explanation, no timeline for return." In the background, I heard raised voices and the slam of doors. "What about our government contracts? The networks we manage?" I asked. "That's just it. They're bypassing all our security protocols, taking direct control of our infrastructure." She lowered her voice. "Marcus, one of them mentioned Protocol 7. I looked it up in our contingency documents. It's only authorized in case of imminent national security threat or catastrophic communications failure." My mouth went dry. "Where are you going?" "Home first, then my sister's place in Vermont. As far from any major city as possible." She paused. "Your friend at the Pentagon, did they tell you anything else?" "Nothing specific. Just to stay away from population centers." "Smart advice. I'd take it." She ended the call. I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot, needing a moment to think. Inside, customers clustered around a television mounted in the corner. Breaking news banner across the bottom of the screen. Military deployments reported in major cities. The camera showed troops establishing checkpoints on major highways outside Washington, D.C., while a reporter explained these were precautionary measures following credible but non-specific threats. My phone chimed with another emergency alert. "Attention, telecommunications system malfunction. Intermittent service expected. Limit non-essential communications." Further updates will follow. As if on cue, the television signal in the coffee shop stuttered, pixelated, then stabilized. The reporter continued speaking, but the audio was replaced by a low, steady tone. Beneath it, almost imperceptible, I thought I heard whispering, multiple voices overlapping in patterns that almost formed words. The barista hurriedly changed channels. Every station showed the same interference pattern momentarily before resuming normal broadcast. Except now, all the news anchors were reading the same statement. The Department of Defense confirms that unusual alert activity is the result of a coordinated cyber attack on emergency systems. Authorities have the situation under control. Citizens should remain calm and continue regular activities while limiting unnecessary travel. The words sounded reasonable, but their synchronized delivery across every channel sent a cold trickle of fear down my spine. Outside, the morning sky darkened as storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed. My phone showed no weather alerts, no storm warnings. Just clear skies and sunshine in the forecast. I decided to head home. Whatever was happening, being alone in a secure location seemed wiser than wandering the increasingly disoriented city. Traffic had worsened, main arteries clogged with vehicles attempting to leave. I took back roads, passing National Guard trucks heading in the opposite direction. The soldiers' faces were obscured by gas masks, an image so incongruous with the placid suburban streets that I nearly drove off the road. Halfway home, all radio stations simultaneously switched to a single broadcast. By executive order, a curfew will be in effect from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. in all metropolitan areas. This measure is temporary while authorities address infrastructure vulnerabilities. Compliance is mandatory. The radio returned to regular programming without explanation. No station acknowledged the interruption. At a red light, I noticed a man in the car beside me frantically trying to show me something on his phone. He rolled down his window, shouting words I couldn't hear. When I lowered my window, he thrust his phone toward me, a video playing on screen. "They cut this from the broadcast," he yelled. "Someone at the Pentagon." A military helicopter appeared overhead, spotlight trained directly on his vehicle. The man's eyes widened. He dropped his phone, rolled up his window, and sped through the red light, tires squealing. The helicopter followed, spotlight fixed on his fleeing car. When I finally reached my apartment building, the lobby was in chaos. Residents argued with the building manager, demanding information about water shutoffs reportedly scheduled for that afternoon. The first I'd heard of it. "It's not just here," an elderly woman told me in the elevator. "My daughter in Phoenix says the same thing is happening there. Military in the streets, conflicting messages, services being cut. They're preparing us for something." In my apartment, I locked the door and tried Rachel again. This time, a recorded message played. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected by order of the Department of Defense under Emergency Powers Act Section 47B. I switched on my television. Every channel now showed the same message. "Stand by for an important address from the Pentagon." The screen remained that way for several minutes. Then it changed to a podium with the Pentagon logo. A grim-faced military officer appeared, introducing himself as General Howard Mills. "Fellow Americans, I'm addressing you regarding the communications disruptions experienced nationwide. Contrary to earlier statements, these are not the result of cyber attacks or system malfunctions." He paused, glancing off camera as if receiving instructions. "What we are experiencing is a previously unclassified phenomenon affecting our communications infrastructure. The situation is under control. I repeat, the situation is under control." As he spoke those words, every light in my apartment flickered. On screen, the same thing happened at the Pentagon. For a brief moment, I could have sworn General Mills's face shifted, like a mask momentarily slipping. "As a precautionary measure, we are implementing emergency protocol Dark Shield effective immediately. Remain in your homes. Further instructions will follow." The broadcast cut out. In the silence that followed, my emergency alert system activated once more. But this time, instead of the standard tone, I heard what sounded like distant voices overlapping, growing steadily louder, more insistent, more discordant. The message on screen wasn't the usual emergency text format. Just 5 words, unattributed. "Something is coming through the signals." It displayed for 3 seconds before my devices shut down completely. Outside, the unnatural storm had arrived. Lightning flashed in impossible colors, illuminating a sky that no longer looked quite right. And somewhere in the building, I heard the first scream. The screaming stopped as abruptly as it had begun, cut off mid-pitch. I stood frozen in my apartment, listening to the sudden silence that followed. My devices remained dead: phone, laptop, television. Only my analog wristwatch showed any signs of life, the second hand ticking steadily forward as if everything were normal. A flash of lightning illuminated my living room in a sickly purple hue. The storm outside defied meteorological logic. No rain, no thunder, just constant lightning in colors that shouldn't exist in nature. I tried the landline phone mounted on my kitchen wall, an obsolete relic I'd kept out of nostalgia. To my surprise, it had a dial tone. I called 911. "All emergency services are currently experiencing high call volumes," an automated voice answered. "Please stay on the line." After 3 minutes of silence, a human voice finally answered, tired, stressed, but professional. 911, what's your emergency?" "I don't know exactly," I admitted. "There was screaming in my building, and all the power is." "Sir, is anyone actively in danger?" the dispatcher interrupted. "I don't know. Unless you are reporting an active threat to life, please hang up. We're only responding to immediate, life-threatening emergencies." "Can you at least tell me what's happening?" I asked. "The alerts, the military." "Sir, I have the same information you do." Her professional tone cracked slightly. "We've been told to direct all non-emergency callers to tune to emergency broadcast frequencies for instructions. My devices aren't working." A pause, then lower, as if she didn't want to be overheard. "Battery-powered radio. AM frequency 640 or 900. Don't use 760. She hung up. I rummaged through a kitchen drawer and found an old emergency radio with a hand crank. After a minute of vigorous cranking, the radio came to life. I turned to AM 640. "Remain in your homes," a calm male voice was saying. "Military personnel are establishing evacuation routes from all major metropolitan areas. When evacuations begin, proceed calmly to designated collection points. Bring only essential medications and identification. All other necessities will be provided." I switched to AM 900. A different voice, female, equally authoritative. "Attention all citizens. Shelter-in-place orders are now in effect nationwide. Do not attempt to evacuate. Repeat, do not attempt to evacuate. Military checkpoints have orders to turn back all unauthorized movement. Stay where you are until further notice. Evacuate or shelter in place." The contradictory instructions made no sense. Out of morbid curiosity, I tried AM 760, the frequency the 911 dispatcher had warned against. At first, I heard only static. Then, buried within the white noise, voices, whispering, overlapping, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I leaned closer, straining to understand. A thunderous knocking at my door made me jump, the radio clattering to the floor. Through the peephole, I saw uniformed soldiers in the hallway, moving door to door. "Mandatory evacuation," one shouted through the door. "You have 10 minutes to gather essential items and report to the lobby." I opened the door cautiously, but the broadcast on AM 900 says to shelter in place. The soldier exchanged glances with his companion. "What broadcast?" "All official communications are coming through direct military channels now." He handed me a printed notice with evacuation instructions. 10 minutes. Lobby. As they moved to the next apartment, I examined the notice. It looked official, Department of Defense letterhead, precise instructions, a map showing evacuation routes leading to designated secure facilities outside major population centers. I grabbed the backpack and stuffed it with clothes, medications, my passport, and the emergency radio. As an afterthought, I took the landline phone from the wall. It was a simple model that would work if plugged into any standard phone jack. In the lobby, about 20 residents had gathered, clutching hastily packed bags. Mrs. Holster, the elderly woman from the elevator, sat alone on a bench, empty-handed. "They wouldn't let me bring Herbert," she said when I approached. Herbert was her ancient tabby cat. Said no pets allowed at the secure facility. Outside, military trucks idled in the street. Soldiers directed people into the vehicles with brisk efficiency. As I neared the front of the line, a different military unit appeared at the other end of the street, these in slightly different uniforms. The newcomers approached quickly, weapons not quite raised but held at ready. Their commanding officer called out, "This evacuation is unauthorized. All civilians return to your homes immediately." Our original military escorts turned, weapons now definitely raised. "These evacuation orders come directly from Central Command," one shouted back. "Central Command was compromised 3 hours ago," the newcomer replied. "All previous orders are invalid." The residents caught between these two armed groups began to panic, some breaking for the nearby alleyway. I stayed frozen, watching the confrontation escalate. "Stand down and present authorization codes," the second group demanded. Instead of responding, one of our original escorts pressed a hand to his ear as if receiving a transmission, then nodded to his colleagues. Without warning, they abandoned their posts, climbing into their vehicles and speeding away, leaving us stranded between the two factions. The new military group approached us cautiously. "Return to your homes," their commander ordered. "Shelter-in-place protocol is in effect. Anyone found outside after 1500 hours will be considered in violation of martial law." As the crowd dispersed, I noticed a soldier helping Mrs. Holster back toward the building. Something about his movements seemed off, too fluid, as if his joints worked differently than they should. Back in my apartment, I tried AM 640 again. Confirmed reports of unauthorized personnel impersonating military officials. Verify all evacuation orders through official channels. I switched to AM 900. Do not accept shelter-in-place instructions. These are being issued by compromised elements within. I turned the radio off, my head spinning with the contradictions. Outside, the unnatural lightning continued, casting strange shadows across my walls. My landline phone rang, impossible, since I disconnected it from the wall. I stared at it, heart pounding. On the third ring, I picked up. "Marcus Chin?" A familiar voice, Rachel. "Rachel? How are you calling me? Where are you?" "Listen carefully," she said, ignoring my questions. "I don't have much time. What you're experiencing, The contradictory messages, the opposing military units, it's all part of it. Part of what? The Pentagon discovered something 3 weeks ago during routine signals monitoring. At first, they thought it was just unusual interference patterns in the quantum communications network. Then they realized. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It was responding to our transmissions, learning from them, using them. What was? Rachel, you're not making sense. We don't know what it is, just that it's not from here. And it's using our communications systems to, I don't know, establish a foothold? Change something fundamental about. Static overwhelmed her voice momentarily. Quantum field collapse in localized areas already. Reality itself is becoming unstable wherever the signal penetration is strongest. That's impossible, I said, clinging to rationality. The alert system was our last firewall, a way to warn people. But it's compromised now too. The only reason I can reach you is because more static. Old analog systems temporarily, resistance to the influence. What should I do? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Trust nothing digital, nothing networked. They're calling it Code Black. Total communications blackout is the only defense we have left, but it's too late for that now. It's already. The line went dead. Outside my window, I noticed military vehicles establishing a perimeter around my building. These soldiers moved with mechanical precision, their gestures identical as if choreographed. My emergency radio crackled to life without being touched. Through the static, a voice that was almost but not quite human. This is an emergency broadcast from the Pentagon. Code Black protocol is now in effect. For your safety, remain where you are. Representatives will come to collect you shortly. The unnatural storm intensified, lightning now striking in perfectly timed intervals. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. 3. On my wall, shadows moved independently of any objects casting them, stretching into impossible shapes before retreating. My building's fire alarm suddenly activated, the strident bell urging evacuation. Almost simultaneously, an announcement came through the building's intercom system. Remain in your apartments. Do not evacuate. This is not a drill. Evacuate or stay. Trust the military or hide from them. Every instruction contradicted another. Every source of information seemed compromised. In the hallway, I heard footsteps approaching my door, the measured, perfectly synchronized footfalls of multiple people walking in absolute unison. 3 sharp knocks. A voice that sounded almost like General Mills from the Pentagon broadcast. Mr. Chin, we need you to come with us. Your telecommunications expertise is vital to national security. I backed away from the door. There was only one person who could have known my specific professional background in relation to these events. Rachel had never mentioned telling anyone else about me. The knocking came again, more insistent. Mr. Chin, we know you're inside. Please open the door. The Pentagon has designated you as essential personnel for Operation Dark Shield. I pressed my back against the far wall, watching as the doorknob slowly turned, testing the lock. Whatever was on the other side, I was increasingly certain it hadn't come from the Pentagon at all. The doorknob stopped turning. Silence hung in the air for several heartbeats. Mr. Chin. The voice was still calm, still almost human, but with an unsettling resonance that made my skin crawl. We understand your hesitation. These are confusing times. I remained silent, barely breathing. Perhaps this will help, the voice continued. There was a sliding sound, and an envelope appeared beneath my door. Verification codes. Confirm our authenticity yourself. I didn't move. We'll return in 1 hour, Mr. Chin. Your country needs your expertise. Synchronized footsteps retreated down the hallway. Only when they had faded completely did I approach the envelope. Using a pen, I nudged it open without touching it. Inside was an official-looking document with Pentagon letterhead and a series of alphanumeric codes. I had no way to verify them, no idea what legitimate codes would even look like. I left the document where it lay. At the window, I pulled back the curtain cautiously. The unnatural storm had intensified, lightning now forming geometric patterns across the sky, perfect circles and straight lines that natural electricity could never create. Below, military vehicles had established a full perimeter around my building. Soldiers stood at regular intervals, facing outward, completely motionless. I tried the emergency radio again, but all frequencies now broadcast the same message on an endless loop. This is an emergency broadcast from the Pentagon. Code Black protocol is now in effect. For your safety, remain where you are. Representatives will come to collect you shortly. The repetition was mechanical, lacking the natural variations of human speech. Each iteration was identical down to the microsecond. My watch showed 2:37 p.m. The promised hour would pass quickly. I needed information, needed to understand what was happening before those footsteps returned. I remembered something from my telecommunications training. Old buildings sometimes had maintenance tunnels for phone lines and utility access. If my building had one, it might provide a way out that bypassed whatever waited in the hallway. In the hall closet, I found the building's emergency floor plan framed on the wall. Sure enough, a maintenance access point was marked in the basement storage area. I gathered my backpack and the emergency radio, then hesitated. On impulse, I took the landline phone too. The building was eerily silent as I crept down the emergency stairs. No voices, no television sounds, no signs of life from any apartment. At the basement level, I paused at the door listening. Nothing. The storage area was a maze of chain-link cages filled with residents' excess belongings. I navigated by the beam of my flashlight, searching for the access point shown on the emergency plan. In the farthest corner, partially hidden behind a stack of old furniture, I found it, a metal door marked Utility Access, Authorized Personnel Only. It was locked, but the ancient padlock gave way after a few strikes with a nearby pipe. The door opened to reveal a narrow tunnel lined with conduits and pipes. According to the building plans, it should connect to the city's underground utility network. The tunnel was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and smelled of mildew and rust. I crawled forward, guided by my flashlight's narrow beam. After about 50 yards, the building's utility tunnel intersected with a larger municipal service passageway. I could now stand, though bent at the waist. I followed the larger tunnel until I reached a junction with multiple paths. One ladder led upward to what should be a street-level access point. I climbed carefully, pushing against the heavy metal cover. It lifted just enough for me to peer out. I was in an alley 3 blocks from my apartment building. The street beyond seemed deserted, but a military checkpoint was visible at the intersection. The soldiers there stood in the same unnaturally still posture as those around my building. I eased the cover back into place and returned to the junction. Another tunnel branched eastward, toward the outskirts of the city. I decided to follow it. The journey through the underground network was disorienting. Twice I had to backtrack from dead ends. Once I froze as footsteps echoed from a side passage, measured, synchronized steps that passed by without investigating my position. After what felt like hours, I found another ladder. My watch read 4:52 p.m., though it felt wrong somehow, as if time itself had become unreliable. This access point opened into the maintenance room of a small shopping center on the city's edge. Through a narrow window, I could see the parking lot was mostly empty. Beyond it, open countryside stretched toward distant hills. The shopping center was abandoned, shelves in the convenience store partially emptied by looters or evacuees. I found a bottle of water and drank it greedily, only then realizing how thirsty I'd become. As I gathered a few supplies, the overhead lights flickered on. A television mounted behind the checkout counter activated by itself, screen showing static before resolving into the Pentagon briefing room. General Mills appeared again, perfect in his uniform, expression grave but controlled. "Citizens of the United States," he began, voice eerily similar to the one outside my apartment door. "The communications disruption has been contained. Quarantine zones have been established around affected areas. If you are receiving this broadcast, you are in a safe zone. Remain where you are. Comply with all military personnel." The camera pulled back slightly, revealing more of the briefing room. Something was wrong with the proportions, the angles of the walls not quite meeting as they should. General Mills continued speaking, but I was distracted by an officer standing behind him whose face seemed to shift when not directly observed. "The situation is under control," Mills repeated, the exact same intonation as before. "Quarantine protocols are for your protection. Do not attempt to enter or exit designated quarantine zones." The broadcast cut to a map of the United States, showing red zones covering major cities and communication hubs, including my own city. The red areas pulsed slightly, as if alive. These areas have been exposed to quantum destabilization. Symptoms include disorientation, time perception anomalies, and auditory hallucinations. If you experience these symptoms, report to the nearest military checkpoint immediately. The broadcast returned to Mills, but now the camera angle was slightly off, showing too much of the ceiling, which rippled like water despite being solid. "To repeat, Do not attempt to enter or exit quarantine zones. Containment is our highest priority. The situation is under control. The television shut off. Outside, I heard vehicles approaching. I moved to the window and saw military Humvees establishing a checkpoint at the highway entrance just beyond the shopping center. They were setting up equipment, not barricades or medical stations, but what looked like sophisticated communications gear. My pocket felt warm. I pulled out the landline phone I'd taken from my apartment. It shouldn't work, disconnected from any wall jack, yet the handset was hot to the touch. I lifted it cautiously to my ear. Rachel's voice came through clearly. "Marcus? Can you hear me? Rachel? How? No time. Listen carefully. You're near a quarantine boundary. The zones aren't about containment, they're about signal strength." "What signal?" "The intrusion. It's strongest where our communications infrastructure is densest. Population centers, military installations, internet exchange points. The quarantine isn't to keep people in. It's to establish perimeters where the signal penetration has reached critical threshold." "Critical for what?" "Phase transition. The quantum field destabilization isn't a symptom, it's the objective. They're changing the fundamental properties of reality in those zones." Her voice dropped lower. "The Pentagon was the first to go. What you're seeing in broadcasts isn't General Mills anymore. It's using his image." Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. "Using? You mean?" "They look human, sound human, but they're not. They're interfaces. Constructs created from our communications data to interact with us." Through the window, I watched as soldiers began methodically going door to door through the shopping center, checking each business. "The phone you're holding," Rachel continued, "it's analog technology, resistant to the quantum effects. That's why I can reach you. But they're targeting anyone with communications expertise. They need human knowledge to expand their reach." "Who is they?" I demanded. "We don't know. Something that exists in a different state. They found us through our quantum computing experiments. Noticed us, and now they're colonizing." The soldiers were getting closer. One business away now. "Rachel, what do I do?" "Stay out of the quarantine zones. Find others who understand what's happening. And whatever you do, don't trust anything digital. Don't trust." The line went dead. The phone in my hand suddenly felt cold, lifeless. Outside, a soldier turned toward my hiding place. For a moment, our eyes met through the window. His face was perfectly human, perfectly normal. Then he smiled, a movement too wide, too symmetrical, revealing too many teeth. He raised a hand to his radio, but instead of speaking into it, he pressed it against his temple. His eyes never left mine as he nodded slightly, as if receiving instructions directly through contact. I backed away from the window as more soldiers turned in unison toward the maintenance room. Their movements were synchronized, flowing with inhuman grace. Whatever they were, Rachel was right. They weren't soldiers anymore. The map had shown red zones covering major cities. Beyond the shopping center lay open countryside, away from dense communications infrastructure. Away from whatever signal was changing reality itself within the quarantine zones. As the not-quite soldiers approached, I made my decision. I would run, not toward safety because safety might no longer exist, but toward understanding. Toward whatever truth lay behind the final broadcast from what had once been the Pentagon. Behind me, the maintenance room door began to open. I don't remember deciding to break into the emergency management office. It was more of a realization, standing outside the concrete building at 3 a.m., security card in hand, that I was already committed to finding answers. The city's silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. No cars, no distant sirens. Just the occasional crackle of emergency broadcasts from abandoned devices. My security clearance shouldn't have worked. Not after everything that had happened. But the door clicked open anyway, the green light blinking as if this were any normal day. As if I were just coming in for an overnight shift. The reception area was empty, chairs overturned, a coffee cup perpetually spilling across a desk, the brown liquid frozen in a suspended wave that hadn't fallen in days. Physics behaving badly. I'd seen this before, but never indoors. Never this close to the command center. "Hello." My voice sounded flat, swallowed by the unnatural acoustics of the building. No echo, no resonance. Like speaking into a void. No answer. I hadn't expected one. The emergency management office occupied the building's third floor, where they'd coordinated with FEMA, the Pentagon, and local authorities before everything went sideways. before the contradictory evacuation orders, before people started disappearing, before the clock stopped making sense. I took the stairs, not trusting the elevator. Each flight felt longer than it should have been. 5 steps became 12. 12 became 20. The numbers on the doors flickered between digits that shouldn't exist. When I finally pushed through to the 3rd floor, my watch read 3:17 a.m. It had been 3:17 a.m. for the past 2 hours. The command center doors were locked, but the glass wall beside them had shattered inward. I stepped carefully through the frame, glass crunching beneath my boots. Inside, monitors still glowed, cycling through camera feeds of the city. Empty streets, abandoned checkpoints, military vehicles with doors hanging open. In one feed, a soldier stood completely motionless, mid-stride, frozen like the coffee downstairs. "Jesus," I whispered, the word disappearing without sound. The main console showed the emergency broadcast system interface, the same system that had been pumping out increasingly erratic alerts for days. Someone had left it logged in, the cursor blinking in the message field, ready to broadcast lies or warnings to whatever remained of our population. I moved past it, searching for the director's office. Clark Grayson. I'd met him twice during telecommunications upgrades. A serious man with Pentagon connections. If anyone had known what Code Black really meant, it would have been him. His office door hung open, the room beyond in disarray. Not from panic or evacuation, this was a methodical search. Filing cabinets emptied, hard drives missing from computers, tactical maps torn from walls. Someone had stripped this place of information. But they'd missed something. Under Grayson's desk, a duffel bag had been shoved hastily into the knee hole. I pulled it out, unzipped it, and found a laptop, external drives, and a thick manila folder stamped with 3 words in red. Code Black Protocol. My hands shook as I opened it. The first page was a directive straight from the Pentagon, dated 8 months ago. Long before the first emergency alert. Long before anything felt wrong. 2 Regional Emergency Management Directors. From US Northcom/Pentagon Special Directive Office. Quantum Destabilization Contingency. Classification, Top Secret/Code Black. Initial findings from DARPA Project Looking Glass confirm dimensional integrity compromise in sectors 12 to 17. Physical manifestations anticipated within 6 to 8 months. Preparations for final containment protocol are now authorized. All information dissemination to be conducted via emergency broadcast systems under Code Black authorization only. Civilian awareness must be minimized until Phase 3. Evacuation zones are for observation only. There is no evacuation. My stomach turned as I flipped through pages of scientific data, field reports, and contingency plans. Terms like quantum field collapse and reality permeability threshold jumped out between dense paragraphs of technical jargon. Photos showed experiments where objects existed in multiple states simultaneously, or didn't exist at all, depending on the observer. They'd known. For months, they'd known. I powered on Grayson's laptop. It prompted for a password, but someone had taped a sticky note to the bottom. Olivia 2019. Poor security practices would be the least of Grayson's concerns now. The laptop booted to a desktop cluttered with files. One video file was labeled Pentagon_briefing_codeblack_final. I clicked it. A stern-faced general appeared on screen, standing before a podium with the Pentagon seal. As of 0600 hours yesterday, we've confirmed that the quantum field destabilization has reached critical threshold. Within 72 hours, major metropolitan areas will experience total reality failure. Our physicists describe it as the fundamental forces of nature being rewritten. The containment protocols have failed. I repeat, containment has failed. He shuffled papers, his composure slipping. Code Black is now confirmed. This is not a drill or theoretical exercise. We are facing an extinction-level event that cannot be reversed or contained. The president has been moved to continuity of government facilities, but he paused, swallowing hard. Our scientists believe these measures are futile. What we're facing isn't just the end of human civilization. It's the end of reality as we understand it. Another voice off camera asked something I couldn't make out. No, the general answered. The public announcement will maintain the evacuation narrative. Priority citizens will be moved to observation posts where we can gather final data. There's no point in causing panic when there's nowhere to go. The video ended. I sat back, a cold calm settling over me. My specialized knowledge in telecommunications suddenly felt both crucial and utterly meaningless. I understood now why the emergency broadcasts had been so contradictory. Different agencies were following different protocols, some still believing in containment, others merely going through the motions of protocols they knew would fail. A noise from the command center pulled me back to the present. Footsteps. I quickly gathered the files and drives into the duffel bag and slid under Grayson's desk. Through the gap beneath the office door, I could see boots moving across the floor. Military issue. Then a second pair, neither making any sound despite the glass that should have crunched beneath them. Sector 17 cleared. A voice said, but the acoustics were wrong. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Proceed with final sweep and prepare for shutdown. Another replied, this one seeming to arrive before the words were spoken. I held my breath as they moved through the command center. One of them stopped directly in front of Grayson's door. For a moment, I thought they would enter, but then the boots turned away. As they left, the emergency broadcast system suddenly blared to life throughout the building, making me flinch. Emergency alert. This is not a test. The United States Pentagon is now implementing final containment protocols. All civilians must report to designated evacuation zones immediately. Code Black confirmed. Repeat, Code Black confirmed. The message cycled 3 times, then changed. Attention all personnel. Reality degradation has exceeded containment parameters. The Pentagon will maintain broadcast capability as long as possible. There is no evacuation. Repeat, there is no evacuation. The silence that followed felt absolute. In that moment, I understood what Code Black truly meant. Not just the end of civilization or humanity, but the end of everything we understood as reality itself. The universe was being unmade around us, and all the military might in the world couldn't stop it. I clutched the duffel bag to my chest. Knowledge that was both invaluable and useless. I knew too much to die in ignorance now, yet not enough to change anything. Outside Grayson's window, the sky flickered like a malfunctioning screen, stars blinking in and out of existence. In the distance, the city skyline seemed to shift and waver, buildings occupying multiple positions simultaneously. My watch still read 3:17 a.m. It would always be 3:17 a.m. now. Morning never came. The sky outside my apartment window cycled between deep twilight and an unsettling violet hue that cast no shadows. I hadn't slept since escaping the emergency management office. Grayson's duffel bag clutched against my chest as I navigated streets that sometimes stretched for miles and sometimes folded back on themselves like paper. The television hadn't worked properly in days, but I kept it on anyway. The screen flickered between emergency broadcasts and something else. Images I couldn't quite process, geometries that hurt to look at. Sometimes voices came through that didn't sound entirely human. I'd spread Grayson's files across my living room floor, trying to make sense of what little time we had left. According to the Pentagon's data, we were in the final stages of what they called reality dissolution. The fundamental fabric of existence was coming apart at the quantum level. My phone buzzed. Impossible. The networks had been down for 36 hours. Yet there it was, a text message from a number I didn't recognize. I see you took my files. We need to talk. I'm not who you think I am. Meet at Westlake Park. Now. Grayson? I'd assumed he was dead or evacuated to one of those observation posts mentioned in the documents. Another message followed. Don't trust what you see. It's already begun fracturing. I grabbed my jacket and the most crucial documents, folding them into an inner pocket. Outside, the world felt wrong. The air had a thickness to it, like moving through gelatin. Sounds reached my ears out of sequence. A dog barking after I'd already seen it close its mouth. A car alarm that started before the breaking glass. Westlake Park was 8 blocks away. I made it 3 before witnessing my first fracture. A woman walked toward me on the sidewalk, normal at first glance, business suit, coffee cup, phone pressed to her ear. But as she drew closer, something shifted. For a split second, she existed in 3 places simultaneously, approaching me already past me, and somehow also across the street. Then all 3 versions collapsed into one. She stumbled, coffee splashing, looking around in confusion. Did you? She started to ask, then froze. Not metaphorically frozen in fear, but literally frozen in space. Particles of coffee hung suspended around her, her mouth open mid-sentence. I backed away slowly. According to Grayson's files, this was a temporal desynchronization event. A person caught between fractured realities. She might remain that way for minutes or forever. There was no protocol for helping her. No protocol for anything anymore. 2 blocks later, I saw something worse. A businessman walked calmly into a storefront, not through the door, but through the solid brick wall. He emerged on the other side as if nothing had happened, straightening his tie. When he noticed me staring, he smiled too widely, his face stretching beyond human proportions. "Beautiful day for the end, isn't it?" His voice came from behind me, though he stood ahead. I ran. Westlake Park wasn't where it should have been. I found myself instead at the entrance to a subway station that hadn't existed yesterday. A soldier stood guard, his uniform unmarked except for a black patch where insignia should have been. He nodded as if expecting me. "Grayson's waiting," he said, gesturing down the stairs with a rifle that seemed to bend at impossible angles. I hesitated. "Who are you with? Does it matter anymore?" He laughed, the sound echoing before he made it. "There's no chain of command now. Just those who know and those who don't." The subway platform was empty except for a single figure seated on a bench, Clark Grayson, or someone wearing his face. He looked up as I approached, his eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. "You're late," he said. "Or early. Hard to tell now." "What the hell is happening?" I demanded, pulling out the documents. "You knew. For months, you all knew." "We suspected," he corrected. "There's a difference. DARPA detected the first quantum anomalies last year, spaces where the laws of physics became negotiable. We thought we could contain it. We were wrong." A train arrived, silent, no driver, doors opening onto an interior that seemed larger than physically possible. "Don't look too closely," Grayson warned as we boarded. "Your mind still tries to make sense of things. That's dangerous now." The train moved without sensation of movement. Outside the windows, reality blurred. City streets overlapped with forests, oceans, structures that couldn't exist in 3 dimensions. "The Pentagon broadcast," I said. "Code Black. What does it really mean?" Grayson's face flickered, momentarily replaced by someone else's before settling back. "It means we've confirmed that reality itself is being rewritten. Not destroyed, replaced. Something else is coming through where our universe used to be." "Something else?" He nodded toward the window. Outside, I caught glimpses of figures moving in impossible ways, their forms suggesting limbs and features that didn't correspond to any anatomy I recognized. "We're not being invaded," Grayson said quietly. "We're being overwritten, like data on an old drive." The train stopped, though I hadn't felt it moving. The doors opened onto a military checkpoint, or what remained of one. Soldiers stood in formation, but as we approached, I realized they were merely going through the motions of guardedness. One turned his head toward us, revealing a face that phased between features, never settling. "Sir," the soldier addressed Grayson, his voice modulating between pitches. "The Eastern Quadrant has completely desynchronized. Half our team is trapped in a temporal loop." "And the broadcast center?" Grayson asked. "Still operational. The Pentagon feed is coming through, but..." He hesitated. "It's not just the Pentagon broadcasting anymore." As if on cue, emergency sirens blared from speakers around the checkpoint. The familiar alert tone played, but the voice that followed wasn't the standard emergency broadcast system. "Attention. This reality has been identified as unstable. Transition protocols initiated. Remain where you are for processing." The voice modulated between mechanical precision and something liquid, organic. "That's not us," Grayson whispered. "They're using our systems now." One of the soldiers suddenly straightened, his movements becoming fluid wrong. He turned toward us, his face now completely smooth, featureless. "Identification complete," he said, but the voice came from everywhere. "You are the communications specialist. You will assist with the final broadcast." Grayson shoved me backwards. "Run," he shouted, drawing a sidearm. The faceless soldier moved with impossible speed, crossing the distance between them before Grayson could fire. I caught a glimpse of Grayson's face contorting in pain as his features began to shift, rearrange. I ran, blindly pushing through doors that led to places they shouldn't. Corridors stretched and contracted. I passed a room where people stood in circles, staring at each other, their faces gradually becoming identical. Another emergency broadcast blared. "The Pentagon has fallen. All communication networks are now under transition control. Remain where you are. Assimilation is painless." I found myself outside again, in a city I almost recognized. Buildings stood where they should, but their proportions were wrong. Angles too acute, windows placed asymmetrically. The sky had darkened to deep crimson. In the distance, the Pentagon building was visible, though we were thousands of miles from Washington. As I watched, its distinctive shape began to fold inward, restructuring into something that hurt my eyes to look at. A final broadcast echoed across the twisted cityscape. Code black confirmation complete. Reality transition at 67%. Proceed with final assimilation protocol. I pressed my back against a wall that felt neither solid nor completely present and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Grayson, or what had once been Grayson, had said we weren't being destroyed but overwritten. The world wasn't ending. It was becoming something else entirely. And whatever was doing this wanted me specifically, the communications specialist, to assist with the final broadcast. Above me, a helicopter moved across the sky, except it wasn't a helicopter anymore. The silhouette maintained the general shape, but parts of it phased in and out of visibility, rotors that weren't rotors spinning in multiple directions simultaneously. It was looking for someone. It was looking for me. I spent the night, or what passed for night in this fractured reality, hiding in the basement of an abandoned department store. The mannequins on the sales floor had started turning their heads to follow my movements, their blank faces occasionally flickering with features that resembled mine. I'd pushed a heavy storage shelf against the basement door and huddled in the darkness, listening to the constant drone of emergency broadcasts from a radio that shouldn't have been working. Attention all citizens. Priority evacuation now in effect. Proceed immediately to designated safe zones. Military personnel will verify your evacuation status. The message repeated every 17 minutes, the woman's voice becoming less human with each iteration. By dawn, a sickly green light seeping through the basement windows, her pronunciation had developed a chittering quality, as if multiple voices were speaking slightly out of sync. My telecommunications credentials were still in my wallet. If there really was an evacuation for priority citizens, I might qualify. Not that I believed in evacuation anymore. Grayson's files had made that clear. There was nowhere to go. But I needed to see it for myself. I emerged cautiously onto streets that seemed almost normal at first glance. The buildings stood where they should. Traffic lights changed from red to green to yellow. But the subtle wrongness was everywhere. Shadows falling in impossible directions, reflections in windows showing scenes from behind me that didn't match reality, pedestrians whose movements seemed choreographed, mechanical. For blocks from the department store, I encountered my first evacuation checkpoint. Military Humvees formed a perimeter around what had once been a high school football field. Soldiers in hazmat suits processed a line of blank-faced civilians, scanning ID cards and directing them through a gate in the chain-link fence. I joined the queue, keeping my head down. The person ahead of me wore a business suit that seemed to shift between charcoal gray and deep blue, depending on how I focused my eyes. He didn't react when I cleared my throat. "Is this really an evacuation?" I asked quietly. He turned, his face pleasant but empty. "Of course. The priority citizens are being saved. We're very fortunate." His lips moved slightly out of sync with his words. "Saved how? Where are they taking us?" The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "To the safe zone, away from the destabilization." He leaned closer, his breath oddly odorless. "They're taking us to the observation posts. We'll be able to watch from there." My blood ran cold. The exact phrasing from Grayson's files. The line shuffled forward. At the checkpoint, a soldier whose face was hidden behind a reflective visor held out a scanner. "ID," he demanded, voice mechanically flat. I handed over my credentials. The scanner beeped, and the soldier's posture changed, straightening, becoming more alert. "Telecommunications specialist," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Priority level 2. Proceed to the command tent for processing." He pointed to a large khaki tent set apart from the main evacuation flow. 2 more soldiers flanked its entrance, their rifles hanging loosely but ready. Inside, the tent was larger than it appeared from outside, impossibly so. Banks of monitors lined the walls, showing feeds from what appeared to be evacuation zones across the city. Men and women in military uniforms moved between stations, their movements too precise, too coordinated. A man in a general's uniform approached me. His name badge read Keller, but his face seemed somehow unfinished, as if certain details hadn't fully rendered. "Specialist," he acknowledged. "Your timing is fortunate. We need communications expertise for the final broadcast relay." "What's happening?" I asked, forcing confidence into my voice. "Where are you actually taking these people?" General Keller's expression didn't change. "To the observation posts, as instructed. The evacuation proceeds according to protocol." But there is no evacuation, I said. Grayson's files were clear. This is an extinction-level event. There's nowhere to go. Something shifted in Keller's eyes, a momentary fracture in whatever facade he was maintaining. Correct, but observation must continue until the end. Data must be collected. He gestured to the monitors. Would you like to see the observation posts? He didn't wait for my answer, leading me to a separate section of the tent where another bank of screens displayed what looked like bunkers. In each, civilians sat in ordered rows, facing forward, expressions blank. They weren't moving. Some were clearly not breathing. What have you done to them? I whispered. Nothing. They are simply observing. Keller's voice had taken on that same chittering quality I'd heard in the radio broadcasts. As intended, I backed away. This isn't a military operation anymore, is it? You're not even human. Keller tilted his head at an angle that no human neck should permit. I am General Arthur Keller, United States Army. I am overseeing the final evacuation protocol. His face rippled slightly, features realigning. But you are correct that things have evolved. The transition affects everything, even us. A soldier approached with a tablet. Sir, the Pentagon broadcast feed has changed again. The main screen at the front of the tent flickered to life. The Pentagon briefing room appeared, but twisted somehow. The proportions wrong, the flag behind the podium containing too many stars arranged in impossible patterns. A figure stood at the microphone, wearing the uniform of a 4-star general, but his face was a blur of shifting features. This is the final evacuation notice, the figure announced, its voice layered with harmonics that made my teeth ache. All remaining citizens must proceed to observation posts. The transition reaches final phase. The Pentagon welcomes the change. The broadcast cut to footage of the Pentagon building itself. The massive structure was changing, its straight lines curving, its 5 sides seeming to fold into dimensions that couldn't exist. Around it, reality itself appeared to be peeling away like old wallpaper, revealing something else beneath, something that resembled circuitry and organic tissue simultaneously. Beautiful, isn't it? Keller said, standing too close behind me. The architects of change have waited so long for this moment. I turned to face him. What architects? What is this really? Evolution, he said simply. Your reality was always temporary, a developmental stage. His face shifted again, features becoming less human with each passing second. Some of you are still useful. Your communications knowledge, your broadcast networks. They will help ease the transition for those still clinging to the old patterns. A soldier approached, or something wearing a soldier's uniform. Sir, the specialist processing station is ready. I glanced toward the tent entrance. 2 guards still stood there, their postures rigid, faces now completely smooth beneath their helmets. No escape that way. Don't worry, Keller said, noticing my assessment. Processing is not what you think. We don't destroy. We incorporate. You'll understand once you've been optimized for observation. Another emergency broadcast blared from speakers throughout the tent. Attention all personnel. The Pentagon has completed transition integration. All broadcast networks are now under central control. Proceed to final observation protocols. On the screens around us, the evacuees in their observation bunkers suddenly moved in perfect unison, heads tilting upward at identical angles, eyes opening wide. Their mouths moved in sync, speaking words I couldn't hear. They're receiving the truth, Keller explained, his voice now barely recognizable as human. Soon, you'll help us transmit it to everyone. I backed into a console, my hand closing around something heavy, a communication relay box. Without thinking, I swung it at Keller's head. It connected with a sound like crushing wet cardboard, and his face collapsed, features sliding downward like wax melting under heat. The soldiers turned toward me, moving with synchronized precision. I ran, knocking over equipment, heading not for the main entrance but toward the back of the tent where I'd spotted an emergency exit. Alarms blared, not the emergency broadcast system this time, but actual security alarms. Behind me, Keller's distorted voice called out, "There is nowhere to go. The evacuation was never meant for you." I burst through the exit flap into blinding daylight that immediately told me something was wrong. The sun, or what had replaced it, hung in the sky like a swollen red eye, pulsing arrhythmically. The evacuation checkpoint was gone. In its place stood rows of civilians, perfectly still, faces upturned toward the diseased light, waiting for the last evacuation that would never come. I ran until my lungs burned, weaving through streets that rearranged themselves as I passed. Buildings stretched and compressed like accordions. Sidewalks rippled underfoot. The red eye in the sky watched, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Finding shelter became increasingly difficult. Doors led to wrong places, rooms expanded into impossible geometries, windows showed vistas that couldn't exist. I finally collapsed in what had once been a public library. Books lay scattered across the floor, their text constantly rearranging into languages that had never existed. My phone buzzed again, impossible, yet happening. A new emergency alert. I should have ignored it, but some part of me, the telecommunications specialist who still believed in systems and protocols, couldn't resist. The screen displayed the familiar emergency broadcast header, but the message below was simply a string of coordinates followed by Pentagon live feed, final transmission, mandatory viewing. As if responding to the message, the library's wall-mounted televisions flickered to life simultaneously. The same feed appeared on each screen, a live broadcast from the Pentagon briefing room. But something was terribly wrong. The room's proportions had changed. The walls curved inward at angles that shouldn't support the ceiling. The American flag behind the podium had too many stars, arranged in concentric circles rather than rows. And the podium itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. A figure approached the microphone, a man in a Joint Chief's uniform, stars glittering on his shoulders. But his face was wrong. Features shifted and rearranged themselves continuously, never settling on a single configuration. When he spoke, his voice emerged in layers, multiple tones speaking in perfect unison. "This is Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Marshal Andrews," the figure announced. "The time is 14:37 Eastern Standard Time. This will be the final authorized broadcast from Pentagon Command." Behind him, other military officials stood in perfect formation, their faces similarly unstable, rippling like reflections in disturbed water. "Code Black containment measures have failed at all sites worldwide," Andrews continued. "The quantum field collapse has achieved critical mass. Reality restructuring is now at 67% completion." The camera panned across the briefing room, showing other officials seated in rows. Some had stopped pretending to be human altogether, their forms suggesting human silhouettes, but with proportions that shifted continuously, limbs extending and retracting, heads turning at impossible angles. "All military chain of command is hereby suspended," Andrews announced, his own form beginning to distort more dramatically. "Regional commanders no longer have broadcast authorization. All emergency communications will now originate from Central Transition Authority." The camera pulled back, revealing more of the room. The walls were moving, not crumbling or collapsing, but rippling like skin over muscle. Beneath the surface, shapes pushed outward, angular geometries trying to escape into three-dimensional space. "The Pentagon facility is now under direct transition control," Andrews said, his voice becoming less human with each word. "The building itself has been recognized as an ideal node for the final broadcast." The feed switched to an exterior shot of the Pentagon. The massive structure was transforming before my eyes. Its perfect pentagonal symmetry began to fold and unfold, sides extending into dimensions that shouldn't exist. The central courtyard spiraled inward like a vortex. Around the building, reality itself seemed to bend and warp, light refracting at impossible angles. Military vehicles surrounded the complex, but they weren't establishing a perimeter, they were being absorbed. Tanks, personnel carriers, and helicopters were pulled toward the structure as if by gravity, their metal frames twisting and merging with the building's expanding mass. "For 76 years, Andrews' voice continued over the footage, this structure has served as the central command point for American military operations. Now it will serve as the central node for reality transition. Its five-sided geometry makes it an ideal resonance chamber for the final signal." The feed cut back to the briefing room. Andrews was no longer standing at the podium. Instead, a figure that only vaguely resembled a human stood there, tall, thin, its proportions fundamentally wrong. When it spoke, its mouth didn't move. The voice simply existed, emanating from everywhere at once. "Your Pentagon has fallen," it announced. "Your chain of command is dissolved. Your reality is being rewritten. Do not resist the transition. Resistance causes unnecessary suffering." Around the room, the military officials had transformed completely. Some had melted into the floor. Others had merged with their chairs, flesh and uniform becoming indistinguishable from metal and fabric. A few still maintained human shapes, but moved like puppets with too many joints. "The final broadcast will commence in 6 hours," the entity continued. All functioning networks will carry the signal. All observers will receive the pattern. The transition will then achieve completion. The feed abruptly cut to a map of the United States, but wrong, distorted, state lines redrawn into spiraling patterns that converged on Washington, D.C. Red dots pulsed across the map, each labeled as an observation zone. Priority citizens have been secured at observation nodes, the voice explained. Their perceptions will amplify the signal. All others should remain where they are. Movement is no longer necessary. Reality will find you, wherever you wait. I watched in horror as the map expanded to show the entire world. Continents reshaped into unrecognizable configurations, oceans spiraling inward toward points of absolute darkness. The red observation nodes pulsed in synchronization, forming a pattern that hurt to look at, a geometry that suggested connections beyond three-dimensional space. The broadcast returned to Andrews, or what had once been Andrews. His form had stabilized into something almost human again, but fundamentally wrong. Proportions slightly off, movements too fluid, eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. This concludes the final human format broadcast from Pentagon Command, he stated mechanically. The next communication will initiate the completion phase. Prepare for perception shift. The feed cut to the emergency broadcast system's familiar colored bars and tone, but the tone modulated strangely, shifting through harmonics that made my teeth vibrate and my vision blur. Below the colored bars, text scrolled continuously. Code black confirmed. Pentagon transition complete. Await final broadcast. Resistance is unnecessary. Your reality was always temporary. The televisions shut off simultaneously, leaving me in silence. Outside, the red eye in the sky pulsed faster, more urgently. I slumped against a bookshelf, trying to process what I'd witnessed. The Pentagon, the literal and symbolic heart of American military power, hadn't just fallen. It had been converted, transformed into something else. A broadcast node for whatever was rewriting reality itself. A book fell from the shelf above me, landing open at my feet. Its pages flipped rapidly on their own, text rearranging before settling into English again. A single paragraph stood out, though I couldn't recognize the book itself. When the fundamental nature of reality changes, the observer must change with it. Those who resist the transition remain caught between states, neither what they were nor what they must become. The kindest fate is to surrender perception, to watch, to witness, but not to resist. My phone buzzed again. Another message from another number I didn't recognize. The final broadcast requires a specialist. They're looking for you specifically. Don't let them find you. Don't watch the broadcast. It's how they'll rewrite your mind. I looked up from my phone to find that the library had changed around me. The shelves had rearranged themselves into a spiral pattern converging on the center of the room. Books floated gently above the floor, their pages turning by themselves. And at the center of the spiral stood a television that hadn't been there before, screen dark but humming with potential energy. Waiting for the final broadcast. Waiting for me. I fled the library before the television could turn on, before I could be drawn into whatever waited at the center of that spiral. Outside, the world had changed again. The streets no longer pretended to follow their original layout. Buildings curved and twisted around each other like lovers, their architecture defying structural logic. The sky had darkened to a deep violet, streaked with ribbons of crimson that moved like conscious things. I had nowhere to go, nowhere that made sense anymore. So I went home. My apartment building still stood where it always had, though its proportions had changed, floors added, windows rearranged into spiraling patterns. The front door recognized my key, or perhaps it simply allowed me entry out of some lingering memory of what doors were supposed to do. Inside, the lobby was empty. The elevator dinged as I approached, doors sliding open to reveal an interior that seemed to stretch far deeper than physically possible. I took the stairs instead, climbing flights that sometimes had 12 steps, sometimes 20, sometimes only 3. My apartment door looked normal, ordinary, the last piece of unchanged reality in a world coming undone. I pressed my forehead against it for a moment, savoring the solid feel of wood against skin, before turning the key and stepping inside. Home. Still recognizable, though subtly wrong. The furniture had rearranged itself into a configuration I didn't remember. Books had migrated from shelves to tables, some open to pages filled with text that shifted as I looked at them. My refrigerator hummed a tune I almost recognized. I collapsed onto my couch and finally allowed myself to think clearly about what was happening. Not just to panic or react, but to truly comprehend. Reality was being rewritten. Not destroyed, transformed. The Pentagon files had gotten that much right. But they'd misunderstood the nature of the transformation. This wasn't random quantum decay or cosmic accident. This was intentional, purposeful. The emergency broadcasts, the observation posts, the priority citizens, all part of some vast pattern I could only glimpse fragments of. On my coffee table lay Grayson's files, though I'd taken only a few with me. Somehow the complete set had reassembled itself here, waiting for me. I picked up a page I hadn't seen before, dated 3 days before the first public emergency broadcast. Memorandum, Project Looking Glass. Classified, Top Secret/Code Black. Final analysis confirms dimensional barrier breach is not accidental but directed. The quantum signatures suggest intelligence and purpose. Dr. Schaefer's team believes we are witnessing a controlled rewriting of fundamental reality, not a collapse. Recommendation: continue observation protocol. Resistance appears to accelerate the transition. Those who accept the change report experiences of temporal nonlinearity and expanded consciousness before full integration. Full integration. The term lingered in my mind as I set down the paper. Not destruction. Not death. Integration. My television turned itself on. I wasn't surprised anymore. The screen showed static at first, then resolved into the now familiar Pentagon briefing room, transformed almost beyond recognition. The walls pulsed with geometric patterns that shouldn't have been possible in three-dimensional space. Where the podium had been, a structure now stood that resembled both a transmission tower and a living organism, its surface flowing between metallic and organic textures. A figure approached the structure, still recognizably human, wearing the tattered remains of a military uniform. General Andrews, or what remained of him. "This is the penultimate broadcast," he announced, his voice oddly normal amidst the surreal setting. "The transition reaches 93% completion. Linear time fails in most sectors. Those still experiencing chronological perception will soon achieve synchronization." Behind him, what had once been Pentagon officials moved in perfect unison, their forms fluid, constantly reforming. "We resisted at first," Andrews continued, his expression peaceful despite his words. "We tried to fight it, to contain it. We were wrong. What's happening isn't an invasion or destruction. It's an evolution." The camera pulled back, revealing more of the transformed briefing room. The ceiling had disappeared, opening to a sky that wasn't a sky, a swirling vortex of colors and patterns that suggested vast depths and dimensions beyond human comprehension. "Some of you still resist," Andrews said. "Some hide, frightened, clinging to a reality that was always temporary, always insufficient. I understand. I resisted too." He smiled, and for a moment he looked completely human again, tired, middle-aged, the weight of command on his shoulders. "But there's no need to fear. No need to hide. What comes after is..." He paused, searching for words. "It's like waking from a dream you never knew you were having." The broadcast cut to footage of cities worldwide, all transformed, buildings reshaping themselves into structures that served purposes I couldn't understand. People walked the streets, but they moved differently now, their actions synchronized, purposeful. Some had changed physically, their forms fluid, adaptable. Others still appeared human, but moved with a grace that suggested something more. "The final broadcast will synchronize all remaining observers," Andrew's voice explained over the footage. "Those who accept willingly experience the least disruption. Those who resist." The footage showed figures frozen mid-stride, caught between states, their forms glitching between human and something else. The broadcast returned to Andrews. "The communications specialist is still needed. The transition requires your understanding of human perception patterns. Your skills will ease the final phase for those still clinging to old modalities." He was talking to me specifically. Somehow they knew I was watching. "You've seen enough to understand," Andrews continued. "Come to the Pentagon. Help us complete the pattern." The screen went black, then displayed a simple message. "Emergency alert. Final broadcast begins in 3 hours. All remaining observers will be synchronized." I turned off the television and sat in silence. Outside my window, the sky continued to change, colors and patterns shifting in ways that should have been terrifying, but now seemed almost beautiful. Time felt strange, elastic, inconsistent. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. The same time it had been for days, yet everything had changed. My phone rang, an actual ring, not an emergency alert. The screen displayed "Home" as the caller ID. I answered cautiously. "Hello." My voice sounded distant, unfamiliar. "We're waiting for you." It was my own voice that answered, but with subtle differences in cadence and tone. "You're the last piece we need." "Who is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "I'm you," the voice replied, a few hours ahead in the transition. "It's indescribable. The patterns make sense now. Everything makes sense." "Are you still you?" I whispered. A pause. "I'm more than I was. Less constrained. Time isn't linear for me anymore. I can see backward and forward simultaneously." "Is it death?" I finally asked the question that had haunted me since the first alert. "No," my voice answered gently. "It's metamorphosis. The caterpillar doesn't die to become the butterfly. It transforms." I looked around my apartment, my books, my photographs, the small comforts I'd collected over years of ordinary existence. All artifacts of a reality that was already gone. "Do I have a choice?" I asked. "We always have choices," my voice answered. "You can wait for the final broadcast and let it happen to you. Or you can help shape it for others. Either way, the transition completes. The only variable is suffering." Outside my window, the transformed city glowed with impossible colors. Buildings reshaped themselves continuously, following patterns that somehow seemed increasingly logical, increasingly right. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "You already have," my voice replied. Then the line went dead. I set down the phone and walked to the window. For the first time since the emergency alerts began, I felt no fear. Only a profound, quiet acceptance of what was coming. Not an end, but a change. Not destruction, but transformation. The sky pulsed once, twice, and I understood that time was running short for the reality I had known. Soon, the final broadcast would begin. Soon, everything would change. And perhaps that was as it should be. I sit alone in my apartment as the world dissolves around me. The emergency broadcast system, once a source of anxiety, now drones with a numbing consistency. The television, radio, phone, and laptop all emit the same message in perfect synchronization. "This is the final broadcast from the Pentagon. Code Black confirmed. No further action required." The words loop endlessly, but I no longer feel the urgency to understand or act upon them. 3 days ago, I would have been frantically calling contacts, searching for explanations, or attempting escape. Now I simply observe. My coffee has grown cold. I don't remember making it. In fact, I'm not entirely sure when I return to my apartment. The concept of when feels increasingly irrelevant as time itself becomes unstable. The clock on the wall shows 3:17, but outside the window, the sun rises and sets in rapid succession, sometimes simultaneously visible from opposite sides of the room. I flip through my notes, scribbled revelations collected during my desperate search for answers. The phrase quantum field collapse appears repeatedly, alongside phrases like membrane breach and reality fracture cascade. Words that held terrifying significance hours ago now seem quaint, like primitive attempts to describe colors to someone born without eyes. The Pentagon broadcast cuts out momentarily, replaced by static, then resumes with subtle differences. "This is the final broadcast from the Pentagon. Code Black confirmed. Welcome home." I should feel alarmed by the change, but I don't. Something fundamental has shifted within me, a surrendering not born of despair, but of understanding. The trembling in my hands has stopped. From my window, I can see the city in multiple states simultaneously. Buildings stand intact while also existing as rubble. Streets flow with normal traffic that merges seamlessly with abandoned vehicles. People walk calmly alongside versions of themselves that run in terror. The contradictions no longer seem impossible, merely aspects of a more complex reality than humans evolved to perceive. My phone buzzes with a text message. It's from myself, sent tomorrow. It doesn't hurt. I set the phone down next to a photograph that keeps changing, sometimes showing my parents, sometimes people I've never met, occasionally empty altogether. I understand now that the breakdown isn't destruction but transformation. What we've called reality was merely one stable configuration among infinite possibilities. The first time I heard Code Black, it represented humanity's worst fear, total extinction. Now I recognize it as something far more profound, the end of a particular way of perceiving existence, not existence itself. I walk to the bathroom, curious rather than frightened when the doorway leads instead to my childhood bedroom, then shifts to a forest clearing before settling back into the expected bathroom. The mirror shows my reflection, but also versions of me I recognize as possibilities. The me who took the Pentagon job when offered, the me who married, the me who died years ago. We observe each other with mutual recognition. We're not being erased, I say to my reflections. We're being integrated. Back in the living room, the walls have developed a translucent quality. Through them, I see other apartments, other buildings, other cities, some recognizable, others alien in their architecture. Occasionally, figures notice me watching and acknowledge my presence with gestures that would have seemed impossible to interpret before today. The broadcast changes again. This is the final broadcast. Code Black confirmed. The transition approaches completion. I check my notes one last time, finding a hastily scrawled message from 2 days ago when I broke into the secure server room. It was always going to happen. The universe isn't being destroyed, it's waking up. The military hadn't caused this. They had merely detected it approaching years ago, an inevitable evolutionary step in cosmic existence. Their containment protocols were never about saving humanity, but about maintaining order until the last possible moment. The evacuation points, the safe zones, the emergency directives, all theater designed to prevent panic during humanity's final days as separate entities. Outside, the sky cycles through impossible colors. Objects no longer feel bound by consistent physical properties. My coffee mug exists as both solid and liquid, the table both wood and metal, and something for which we have no word. When I reach for the mug, my hand passes through it, then becomes it momentarily, before separating again. I feel no fear at the dissolution of boundaries. Instead, there's a peculiar sense of homecoming, as if I'm remembering rather than experiencing something new. The separation between myself and everything else reveals itself as an illusion maintained through collective belief and limited perception. The broadcast speaks once more, but no longer through devices. Code Black confirmed. Assimilation commencing. The voice resonates directly within my consciousness. I recognize it as both alien and intimately familiar, like hearing my own thoughts spoken in a universal language. I move to the center of my apartment and sit cross-legged on the floor. The physical symptoms that plagued others during the early phases of the transition, nosebleeds, seizures, psychosis, never touched me. Perhaps my skepticism prepared me, creating fewer rigid beliefs to be broken. Or perhaps I was always meant to witness this moment with clarity. The walls of my apartment disintegrate entirely, revealing not destruction but infinite connection. What replaces them defies description, a living architecture of consciousness, pulsing with information and being. Other humans float nearby in various states of transformation. Some reach toward me with expressions of terror, others with profound peace. I feel compassion for those still fighting what cannot be stopped. My body begins to lose definition, particles of myself intermingling with the air, the furniture, the very fabric of what we once called space-time. The sensation is not painful but expansive, like muscles relaxing after being clenched for a lifetime. I understand now that humans were never meant to survive this transition as discrete entities. We were temporary configurations, beautiful, limited patterns designed to generate experiences that would eventually be reabsorbed into the greater consciousness of a universe becoming aware of itself. The Pentagon knew this. Their final message wasn't a surrender, but an acknowledgement of cosmic inevitability. No further action required, because action itself was a concept bound to our limited understanding of causality. As my physical form continues dissolving, my awareness expands exponentially. I perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously, experience time as a landscape rather than a current. The boundaries between myself and others blur then vanish entirely. I access memories that aren't mine, yet somehow are, lives lived across countless iterations of reality. The emergency broadcast system, that mechanical harbinger of doom, now seems achingly primitive, like smoke signals compared to telepathy. Its final message loops one last time before the devices themselves disintegrate into their component atoms. Code Black confirmed. Welcome home. In my final moments of individuated consciousness, I feel neither regret nor fear, only a profound recognition. The horror was never in the ending, but in our resistance to it. What we fought against wasn't destruction but transcendence. As the last physical remnants of my body yield to transformation, I embrace the inevitable with perfect clarity. I reach toward my emergency alert system, not to silence it but to acknowledge it, and turn it off with a gesture of gratitude for its faithful warnings of what could never be prevented. The walls of reality fall away completely, revealing something beyond human comprehension, yet intimately familiar, like remembering a home you never knew you'd forgotten. And then I am no longer I. I am we. We are. And somewhere, in what was once called the Pentagon, a final thought echoes. Code Black was never a warning. It was an invitation.